Hey all, this is David Ducker coming back at you, and today I'm going to be blatantly ripping off the Red Dice Diaries. My main man John Large over in England, he did a 3-video series, actually I think it was a 4-video series on 3-act structure and how to incorporate that literary technique into your RPGs. So I'm going to be blatantly ripping that off, and I dedicate this video to John Large. Since I'm ripping him off so blatantly, I thought at least I'd let everybody know so they can take a look at his series and compare it to what I'm going to ramble about here, and hopefully have some, just more insight, more points of view on this technique. So 3-act structure in RPGs. Let's look at what is the 3-act structure. It's a classic literary structure that you'll see in pretty much any kind of media. It just comes naturally most of the time. And that's to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's to introduce or exposit upon your characters in your world, then have rising action and continued exposition to a certain degree, before finally climaxing, having those elements clash against each other, and having that emotional resolution and that catharsis that the story is now over. So basically you set them up and then you knock them down. You set them up and you knock them down. And I think he had a 4th part, which was a denouement, or a wrap-up section. I'm just doing one video because I'm lazy. I don't mind if my videos are really long. You might mind, but I don't care. So I'm just doing it all in one video. So you got to do the same thing right there with RPGs, and it's kind of modular. It's kind of like a spiral. Like each session individually should have a beginning, a middle, and a climax, an ending. But then if you zoom out, so okay, let's take this session, if you will, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then zoom out. So you got the session, and then the next session will have the same 3 acts. And then the next session will also have the same 3 acts. But if you line them up next to each other, they form a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then you could take all of that, those 3 sessions, and zoom out again and do it all over again. So you just keep this pattern going through the whole campaign. So each individual session has this structure, and as you lay them next to each other, they form this structure in the long run as well. That's what you want to do. And part of the challenge is you got to do it improvisationally. And fortunately, this technique is so naturalistic, so instinctive to most people that you're not going to have a big problem doing that. But it helps to be aware of it. So in a session, let's look at in a session. You'll have your beginning, which is your exposition or your plot hook. So, the characters all meet at a tavern. The shitty ass mayor busts in the door and says, "My daughter has been kidnapped by kobolds. Kobolds have kidnapped my daughter. Someone help me." That's exposition. That's the beginning. Then the middle is they go to find the kobolds. They fight their way through the forest into the kobold lair. The end is they find the princess. She's strapped down to an altar, and the kobolds are going to sacrifice her to a dragon egg so they can awaken the dragon. How they deal with that is going to be the end and the climax of that session. Now we could look at, and that's perfect, done. 3 acts, very naturalistic. You don't even need to think about it to do it that way. Next session, let's have more exposition. So it could be, they find the Draconomicon in possession of the kobolds from last session, and it tells of a dragon horde in the mountains. So they take the egg and the Draconomicon, because that's your opening, that's your plot hook, is the book. In the middle is they fight their way through the mountains, through some orcs and manticores, let's say. At the end, they find the horde, and let's say it's guarded by some young dragons. Let's say there's 3 dragons there the size of a horse that are too young to breathe fire. So that's your climax, how you deal with that combat situation. Your boss battle. Climax, boss battle, same thing. Or mini boss, whatever. So that right there, how they deal with that, kill the dragons, that can be your climax. Or ride the dragons, train them. But and you can see how when you line that up against the first session, the action continues to rise. You're not dealing with kobolds, now you're dealing with orcs. You know, you're not dealing with a kobold shaman with the Draconomicon. Now you're dealing with 3 young dragons. So you can see how stacked up next to each other, it starts to rise up even higher. You know, that's a very simplistic format, but it effectively illustrates the point that you want to keep this structure going. So, you know, let's I don't know if we need to break down the structure, but let's do it anyway. In terms of a full campaign, the beginning, the exposition, introduce each of your factions. So let's go simplistic again. They're in a town, and there are 4 factions in the town. There's the Thieves Guild, there's the Noble House that controls the town, which are knights, there's a Wizard's Cabal, and there's a temple. 4 factions. So the beginning of the campaign might have 4 adventures, one dealing with each faction that introduces these 4 factions. Perfect. So this campaign, maybe if each of those are one-shots, you could complete the beginning section in 4 sessions. So the campaign as a whole has a 4-session intro where you intro each faction. That's the beginning. I know I might sound repetitive, but repetition is a learning tool. Middle. The middle of your campaign will then be learning something new about each faction that you've already introduced. So the Thieves Guild, you've learned that they used to be pirates, but now they're just smugglers. That was their intro. Now in their rising action in the middle, their extra twist is that they're not only smugglers, but they're slave traders. They smuggle slaves. So the Thieves Guild, you thought they were kind of nice for thieves. Now you're not so sure, because they're dealing with slaves, and that's not cool. Same thing, you go back to the temple. They're a temple of Calastria, the goddess of love. And you think, oh, these guys are really cool. Yeah, they help people get married and deal with their marital difficulties. The little twist could be they have monthly orgies and they set up swingers. You know, they help people trade wives temporarily. And you're like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that, how my character feels about that. So it's a little twist, a little depth and complexity to what you've already established. Don't establish and add depth at the same time. Then that's one thing. Establish, then slowly elaborate, add depth slowly and layer it on. Don't overload the players with exposition. Give them a little bit, and then let that settle in. Then add a little more. Let that settle in. Add a little more. Let that settle in. Don't burn them out with too much info too soon. And that way you can get all these great scenes of the big reveal. You get the big reveal about all these different layers, and that can be great. So then for your ending, that's when the factions clash against each other. So, for example, the Thieves Guild, maybe not only are they trading in slaves, but they're trading in sex slaves. And you find out about this in the middle, and you also find out about the Calastria orgies. At the end of the campaign, somewhere in this end section, this nebulous end section of the campaign, you're going to find there's going to be a connection or a clash. So either you're going to find out that the orgies are plied with sex slaves provided by the Thieves Guild, and that's your big reveal for the whole campaign, is that the Thieves Guild and the Temple are working together. Or you're going to find out that, or the Temple's going to find out about the sex slaves. They're going to declare a holy war against the Thieves Guild because that is directly against the tenets of their religion. And then you're going to have this holy war erupt in the middle of the city. That could be your end of your campaign, your climax piece for these two factions. So again, beginning, intro everything, everybody, all the major players. But don't feel the need to go into much depth. Middle, that's when you add the depth. Everybody gets more depth, more characterization, more backstory, more twists, more goals. The end of your campaign, that is when everyone clashes against each other. That's when your big mass battles happen. That's when duels of honor happen. That's when the fireworks go off. So as a GM, it's good to vaguely kind of plot these out. For each faction, say, what are they going to find out at first? What are they going to learn later? And what's the final conflict of this faction going to be? So do that for each faction. It doesn't really, it might sound like a lot of work, but it's not really because it's so natural. You were going to tell those stories anyway, just format them. Just instead of having one run-on paragraph, separate into 3 little paragraphs. Bite-sized nuggets of goodness. And then, as you're going through, as a GM, look at what phase are we currently in. First session, obviously you're going to be in beginning or intro phase. And that phase could stretch on for 16 sessions, or I don't know if it could go much beyond that, but it might, depending on your style. So after you know you've introduced everyone, or pretty much everyone, then say as a GM, okay, pretty much all the factions are introed, I'm going to switch into the middle. So we were at the beginning of the campaign, now I've introed 10 factions or 5 factions or whatever. Let's go on to the middle of our campaign. So everyone we've got established adds depth, and we might still intro new people, but they're tending to be lesser factions that we intro at that point. Not always, but in general, just in general, say we're at the middle part now. And then at some point, say, okay, now everyone's nice and complex. I don't want to rest on my laurels, though. Let's have them start to clash against each other. We're in the end game now. And the end game, again, it could last like 16 sessions, depending on your campaign style. I mean, it might only last, if it's only 2 factions you've got, you can intro them in 2 sessions. You can build them up in 2 to 4 sessions, and then you can clash them against each other in 2 sessions. So that's a great format. If you only have 8 sessions to run with, do it like that. If you have unlimited sessions to run with, like I said, you might take 16 sessions for the beginning, 32 sessions for the middle, and then 16 for the end. That's closer to how my campaigns run, because I have about 10 factions. So that's closer to the format I end up with. You're going to have exceptions to each of these. You'll have someone that's introed in the middle. You'll have someone who clashes in the middle. Try to make those more minor players, though. If you need action, to get some action out of the minor players, by showing the reaction of the major players, you build their depth. Win-win. You get action, you get minor factions that add depth to the world as a whole, and the reaction of the major players builds their depth so that their clash and their climax is better. The more screen time you give someone, the bigger their clash and their climax and their payoff is going to be. If you only meet someone once, it's not such a big deal when he gets in a duel to the death. If you have met this guy 20 times in the course of your campaign, you're either going to like him or you're going to hate him. You know, if it's still neutral at that point, you as a GM have fucked up. And it doesn't mean they have to like be in love with the guy and think he's their best friend. It doesn't mean they have to vehemently hate him and want to kill him. But just the fact that they've run into him 20 times, they should have something. You know, he's familiar to them. He's known to them. He's familiar, comfortable. He's there. People love the familiar. People are creatures of habit. You know, creature type, habitual. That's human beings. So if you threaten the status quo, it's going to elicit some response, even if they're kind of neutral on the status quo. So that again goes back to my time is money video. So go watch that video too. Watch all my videos. As far as I'm concerned, that's the best policy. But I think that's all I got to say about that. John Large added in at the end, do like some wrap up. Actually, I did do this for my last campaign where I said, okay, the campaign's over. You fought the big mass combat. Please narrate your character's personal epilogue. And Mike is like, oh, I become leader of the Thieves Guild, and then I assassinate the Pharaoh, and I become the Pharaoh. And I'm like, that's awesome. So after our adventures, Mike becomes the Pharaoh and turns the city to Vice City. And Josh is like, you know, I think Josh just became a holy hermit. I wander into the desert, become a holy hermit for all time. Since he's a lich, I become a sand lich. And Aaron said that, oh, I get really drunk at the festival celebrating our victory, and I knock up some girl, and I get married and live unhappily for the rest of my life. So everybody got to narrate their ending, their own personal epilogue, which I think is great. That is kind of your denouement, because you don't want to stretch the game on too much past the climax. And then John Large said also include for yourself some reflections. Say, okay, how did the campaign go? What could I have done better? What did I do well? What did I do poorly? So John Large really advocated that kind of wrap-up time. I just kind of do this continuously, that I'm looking at each individual session. Because if you do each step correctly, when you look back at it, the whole thing should be vaguely correct. Should be. It's not always the case. But you can certainly do that as well. And again, I'll remind you, check out John's videos. His channel is Red Dice Diaries. Great channel. His Gaming Bugbear series is quite entertaining as well. I've ripped off many of those videos as well. And I will continue to do so until he threatens legal action. Which I hope he doesn't do. So that's all I got to really say about 3-act structure. In the comments, let me know what you think. Have you used it? Did it go well? Did it go poorly? Did I miss anything that you could elaborate on? Please leave some comments. If you think I'm an idiot and it's a terrible way to game, leave that comment as well. And don't forget to hit dislike, because negative reinforcement and criticism is just another learning tool, and I appreciate that. Watch all my videos and criticize all of them. Just don't attack me personally and just say I'm ugly, because I already know I'm ugly. I can't do anything about that. But I'm going to sign out now. Everybody have a good day in YouTube land. Cheers.